BBC Radio.
6 Music.
You are now entering parallel universe. And wipe your feet on the way in.
Mark Riley, BBC 6 Music.
Creation and Making Time. Mark Riley here, whilst in Yorkshire, as we know, we've got Bobby Hughes. Hello, mate.
Hello, mate. You nearly made me feel homesick there with all your talk of Bert and Bert's.
Well, that's your old stomping ground, isn't it? Timperley and Altrincham. So you said you used to go for a wet shave there.
Well, I didn't used to go. I went there once and had a really lovely haircut and a lovely wet shave with hot towels.
Oh, mate, stop it. Who did it, Bert or Bert?
I couldn't. I think it was Bert.
Right.
But I'd have to check my notes. But anyway, I'd recommend it.
Hang on a minute. Do you make notes when you've been to the barbers?
Well, say Bert on the receipt. I'm not going to get picky about this. But anyway,
nor am I, mate. Nor am I. So, the Creation, then Making Time.
Yeah, we're looking at New Musical Express, as it was then known, 25th of March 1966. It says here, the Creation have run into trouble over their name. A number of people, including Lord Hill of Luton, head of the Independent Television Authority, have claimed that the name is blasphemous. In a letter to the group's manager, Tony Stratton-Smith, Lord Hill said, I'm inclined to think that although the name is not necessarily blasphemous, it has a very real religious connotation for a great number of people. Stratton-Smith tells us, I chose the name and I don't think it's irreligious. Unlike most pop managers, I've written a religious biography, The Rebel Nun, which received favourable reviews from a number of bishops.
Wow. There he wins that one, doesn't he?
Absolutely. That's not a story you'd expect, really, in the news. So this is Strat, isn't it, who became famous for launching the Charisma label and Genesis and The Nice and all these people, Van de Graaff.
A genius. And, I mean, he never really pulled stunts, as I remember, though he could have done, but not that I'm aware of. But, I mean, this would have been a great stunt for great publicity to call it The Creation to get to ruffle feathers like that in a ridiculous way. But he probably, as he says, he probably didn't even see it coming because it's that ridiculous, isn't it? Of course, the Creation, they had a tune called Biff Bang Pow, didn't they? Which Alan McGee, who then went on to form Creation Records, his band was called Biff Bang Pow as tribute. Yeah,
and Creation, of course, named after the band.
Yep.
In centre pages here, the Walker Brothers' long-awaited debut on London Palladium, the London Palladium show on ATV is set. Negotiations have been completed this week for them to headline the show the first weekend in June. Within a week of that, they're going to leave for a 2-week tour of Australia, visiting Hong Kong on the return journey. And sales, meanwhile, of the Walker Brothers' current hit, The Sun Ain't Gonna Shine Anymore, #1 for the second consecutive week, are approaching 250,000, said a spokesman for Philips on Wednesday. And kind of a bit further to that, you've got the Walker Brothers by Keith Eltham. He says, it's good to have it all to ourselves at the #1 spot this week, said Scott Engel when I spoke to him on Tuesday. I had a sneaky suspicion it might be the Hollies. Our tour with Roy Orbison opens on Friday, and as usual, I'm working myself up into a state of nervous exhaustion over the prospects, but it should be a good show. We're hoping to get the slightly older audience, which Roy will bring in, and the younger set to see us. That way we get the best of both worlds. We'll be doing Sun for the first time on stage. I think, personally, it's a bit too much to just go on and do your latest record, but people seem to expect it. So what can you do? So you already get the suspicion there that he's tiring of that whole circus, don't you?
Well, they really did have the teeny bopper thing going for them, didn't they? And it seemed unlikely by the kind of music that they made. No disrespect, but, you know, ballads and kind of these big power ballads and crooning, it didn't seem to be like the counterpoint to something like the Beatles, who were going to get that hysteria all the time, or the Stones, you know?
Yeah, not at all. It was very kind of sophisticated. He's more like the sort of, I'm not putting them down at all, but more like the sort of Matt Monro audience, wasn't it, really?
Yeah, crooning, ultimately.
Yeah. And just kind of general observation from flicking through this, just about how pop music, obviously it's early 66, pop music's changing, progressing very quickly, artists producing more complex and challenging stuff, and yet it's so obvious here that the mechanisms of the industry haven't changed at all. It's very much the old boys network. You know, you've got the same agents, promoters, managers, and you can feel this clash sort of getting a bit more, kind of the size developing, if you like.
Right. Another thing, just having all of the tunes that you've racked up, including the spares that we have as well. I mean, again, you're looking at the longest track of them all is coming up next, which is James Brown and Night Train at 3.5 minutes. They're all 2.5 minutes, aren't they? 2 minutes, 45 seconds maybe, but that seems to be the kind of general length, duration that they thought was suitable and acceptable, probably for radio, which would have dictated whether they get any success or anything.
Yeah, that's exactly it. Again, that's probably emblematic of that in its way. You've got the Kinks have been appearing without Ray Davies at their live shows this week after relapse of his nervous illness at an office in London last Thursday. Ray was taken back to his Finchley home and obeyed doctor's orders to rest completely. Although he's not planning an immediate return to the Kinks, he'll probably be fit enough to appear on Jukebox Juries this Saturday. The group, meanwhile, will be appearing in Grimsby tomorrow night, where Mick Grace will continue to deputise for Ray. It's unthinkable, isn't it, that idea that who could deputise for Ray Davies there? You know, but the show must go on. That's the adage here.
And who is Mick Grace? And also, it does, but for the grace of grace go I. But also, it does show the kind of, would disrespect be the right word to the artist? Because it's a bit like, interchangeable. It's the Kinks. It's that kind of thing whereby, you know, you've got like the Drifters touring Europe, and it's one of them who was in it for 6 months or whatever. But yeah, you turn up and Ray Davies isn't there with leading the Kinks. Oh, yeah, that's all right. He's only a pop singer.
Well, that's also disrespect to the audience, isn't it? You know, they're expecting one of the heroes, and it's no disrespect to Mick Grace, but, you know, it's an anonymous person.
There is that.
Roy Orbison, page 2. The daddy of beat ballad singers has just flown into London, says NME's Norrie Drummond. Polite, quiet-spoken and slightly mysterious, Roy talks intelligently on any subject and knows more about England than many Englishmen. Dressed in fawn pullover and slacks, he talked, amongst other things, about the war, football, Churchill and Lulu. I'm not kind of splitting hairs here, but Lulu's Scottish.
Oh, anyway. You are splitting hairs, mate. Leave Roy alone.
I was a kid during the war, he says, drawing on a cigarette, and even then I was fascinated by Winston Churchill and the English people. It says he has albums of Churchill's speeches and frequently plays them. Many of them he's memorised. First place he ever went to on his first trip to London was the War Museum. He says, I used to build models of planes during the war and I could identify a plane by the noise of its engines.
Blimey.
He says his interest in aeroplanes gave way to music when he learned that his mum and dad will allow him to stay up later if he decided to sing to them. Now his singing has made him one of the world's highest paid pop singers, and he's headlining the Palladium TV show. So, you know, it could have been a career in plane spotting. Orbison had it not been for Roy Orbison's mum and dad.
And I tell you what, if it had been me and I insisted on singing to me mum and dad, they would have sent me to bed early.
Same here, mate. It ends by reporting that Roy Orbison is considering an offer from Bernard Delfont to play the Talk of the Town. So, correct me if I'm wrong here, the Talk of the Town was a leading cabaret club in London, I think, at the time, wasn't it?
I think you're right, mate, yeah.
And I only mention this because Bernard Delfont is portrayed in that fantastic Steve Coogan, Laurel and Hardy film, isn't it? And he's not portrayed in a good light. He's the kind of smarmy character who keeps appearing, trying to just go on. The show must go on.
These impresarios rarely are shown in a good light, are they? Let's be honest.
No, they're not. Singles, various stuff coming out. Otis Redding, Dusty Springfield. Got to mention Cilla Black's Alfie, just very quickly. Bacharach David number, well suited to Cilla's vibrant style, it says, and its performance would doubtless be boosted by the film. You either love this or hate this. Personally, I find it grew on me with each spin. What did you think?
Oh, vibrant, that's one word for a voice.
Yeah,
anyway.
Absolutely. We're not going there. We're going to James Brown, aren't we?
Thankfully.
All aboard for Night Train. Miami, Florida. Atlanta, Georgia. Raleigh, North Carolina.
James Brown and Night Train, Mark Riley, Bob Hughes, Parallel Universe.
Yes, the NME, 25th of March, 1966. Keith Altham on page 3 goes to see Brian Jones. He says, Brian Jones returned last week from his Australian-American exploits with innumerable albums by Ravi Shankar, an Indian sitarist. On arrival at his Earl's Court Mews house, Brian found he'd misplaced his keys and opened his home by the simple expedient of putting his fist through the first floor window. When I called some 2 hours later, I found the front room had been officially declared a major disaster area, largely due to the Welcome Home Brian Jones Committee party. This comprised Spencer Davis seated beneath a standard lamp wearing his glasses, and Steve Winwood in a green Stetson listening to an LP by the Freedom Highway Singers and beating time on an Indian drum. Also present were Dave, the Spencer's road manager, making himself ill on brandy and beer, and Tom Keylock, the Stones Davis all-purpose chauffeur, drinking bitter from a pudding bowl. It's a decent setup. Man, this is the kind of welcome home I like, said Brian, surveying the festivities with delight. Let me show you one of the things I brought back from the States, he added. A wooden zither-like instrument was produced, which proved to be a dulcimer, an instrument you may be hearing more of. As Brian revealed, it be included on several tracks they recorded in LA, and he also got out a big red sitar. It was just, but I kind of mentioned this story because obviously there was a lot of colour in it, but Keith Altham was... Journalists in those days, they just had so much easy access to people because they'd see them down at the Cromwellian or the Scots of St James, and there weren't these sort of great teams of PRs and managers and agents looking after people. And I did see him like a few years ago bemoaning the fact that journalists these days are a bit too reverential in their interviews, but the climate is completely different. It can take you like months, even years to set up an interview with somebody. I think he cited Paul McCartney as an example, and you don't want to mess it up.
Yeah, he's poacher turned gamekeeper anyway, wasn't he? Because he was a journalist and then he turned into PR, and he did PR. Did he do PR for Hendrix?
I think he might have done, yeah. I think he did.
He did The Who, didn't he? And various other bands in the 70s. Slade he did as well. So he had all the big acts. So I suppose he cut his teeth as a journalist, knew how the other half worked, and then jumped ship kind of thing. But yeah, a legendary name.
Yeah, absolutely. And he wrote a book as well, which is so good. It's fascinating. Peter and Gordon are on page 9. Last week, NME revealed that Bernard Webb, writer of Peter and Gordon's latest hit, Woman, was no less than Paul McCartney. The reason for the fake name? Paul wanted to see if one of his compositions could get it into the charts purely on merit. It did, so he owned up. For Paul, no harm done, but for Peter and Gordon, they immediately came in for a bit of a slamming. It was they, the critics said, who tried to hide the writer's real identity. Obviously, they've been accused here of taking a lot of Lennon McCartney songs and having hits with them.
I suppose, yeah, the distrust would creep in, wouldn't it? But I mean, he's done non-diplumes before, hadn't he? Production work and all kinds of things. What was that? What's in the back of my mind?
Oh, I know. Apollo Vermouth, you're thinking of, are you?
I am.
Yeah,
good work,
that's
mate.
the one. Gordon says, it was just an experiment for Paul's sake. I don't think I could have kept it a secret very long. What is this thing about us doing Lennon McCartney numbers? Elvis used the same songwriters for God knows how many years. So did the Everleys, and nobody had a pop at them.
Well, the thing is they hadn't taken the credit themselves. If it was one of those things where it said Peter and Gordon, what a woman by Peter and Gordon, then that would be misleading. But just a non-diplume from somebody else wrote it. Deal with it, brother.
Absolutely, it's not that big a deal. Meanwhile, the bespectacled Peter was in a quieter mood. We talked about the new bookshop he's opened in Mason's Yard, just off Piccadilly, in association with Marianne Faithfull's husband, John Dunbar. There's also a small art gallery attached to it, he told me, that opens soon. John provides the knowledge about art, and another friend of ours provides the know-how about the books, like first editions, rare publications, etc. And I provide the money, he laughed. So this is, talk about payback, this is Indica, isn't it? Which is 8 months after this, John Lennon and Yoko Ono met there for the first time, and history changed.
Legendary.
The Who, very briefly, by Keith Altham. They're currently in a legal dispute with previous producer Shel Talmy, having left Decca for Polydor. Says here, behind a mountainous barrier of amplifiers in the White Hart Public House, where 2 years ago they played for £12 nightly, I found 3/4 of the band, Keith Moon, Roger Daltrey and John Entwistle rehearsing, no sign of Townsend. I asked them why they decided to dispense with the services of Shel Talmy and produce their own discs. John says he kept confusing us. He'd come up to me in the studio and say, Keith, would you mind keeping the drums down a bit? And interestingly, just under that, 2 new names have been signed to a new record label called Strike. They are the Deputies and Roy Harper. 25-year-old Roy makes his bow with one of his own compositions, Take Me Into Your Eyes. So his first album, Sophisticated Beggar, came out later this week. But his second one, CBS got hold of him after that, and his producer on his second album was Shel Talmy.
Oh, blimey. Well, what goes round comes round.
They didn't get on at all, but I tell you what, Love's first album is out this week.
Signed DC.
Sometimes I feel so lonely. My come down, I'm scared to face. I've pierced my skin again, Lord. No one cares for me. My soul belongs to the dealer. He keeps my mind as well. I play the part of the leecher. No one cares for me, cares for me. Look out, Joe, I'm falling. I can't unfold my arms. I've got one foot.
Love and Sign DC. Mark Riley here. Bob Hughes there.
NME here as well, 25th of March 1966. These gigs happening this week. You got Roy Orbison, Walker Brothers, as mentioned before, and Lulu at Wigan ABC, Frank Ifield at London Palladium, Small Faces at Blackpool South Pier, the Kinks and Dave D. Dozy Beaky make a ditch at Newcastle City Hall, Billy Fiore in Cabaret at Birmingham Smethwick Baths, Dusty Springfield at Bolton Casino Club, Martha Reeves and the Vandellas at the In Crowd Club in Hackney, the Merseys. Didn't they used to be the Mersey Beats, the Merseys?
I think they were two different bands, weren't they?
Oh, were they? I
thought so.
At the California Ballroom in Dunstable, The Who at Walsall Town Hall, Benny King at the Scots of St James in London, let's see, The Action at the Ram Jam Club in Brixton, the Graham Bond Organisation at Eel Pie Island in Twickenham, and Manfred Mann at Norwich Training College. On the classifieds, I mean, we've, under the title here, page 11, Fab Lucky Gear, the very latest novelties, genuine rabbit's foot brooch, firmly set in an untarnishable gold mount, fitted with a string safety catch, plus rabbit's foot keyring and rabbit's foot necklace, set in an untarnishable golden mount on a 6-inch matching golden chain. Who's selling this stuff?
I do remember them as a thing, though, in the 70s.
Do you remember people wearing round the necks, though, as necklaces?
I do remember them, yeah. I mean, it is weird, isn't it? I mean, it could have been worse. It could have been camel's feet or something like that, which would have been slightly more unsavoury, wouldn't it? I mean, that's no offence to rabbits, of course.
No, mate, I know.
No.
That's from Personal Gifts, Marine Road, Morecambe. That's where they were based.
Right.
On the letters front, obviously it's a great time for pop music, but not everybody's happy. Pete Saunders of Chesham. I can't understand all this fuss about James Brown. He's obviously trying to be another Little Richard or Jerry Lee Lewis, but he fails miserably. As for his screams and stage antics, we have a local singer here called Wild Wally of the Knockers Group who screams much louder and moves around more.
I'd pay to see that.
And Marilyn Brearley of Todmorden says, what's all this fuss about the Walker Brothers? Whoever says they're sexy is talking nonsense. They've got as much sex appeal as a bad egg. Each to their own, Mark.
Can you imagine sitting down and writing to a paper just because you didn't fancy someone? It's stretching it a bit, isn't it?
It is a bit, isn't it? You've probably got a lot of time on your hands, I would have thought. And R. Withers of Newport says, a mockery. That's Keith Moon's drumming. How much more satisfying to watch and hear Brian Bennett of the Shadows.
Oh, dear.
Say, can't please everybody.
What?
Just very briefly here, Paul Samuel Smith talking about the Yardbirds and how essentially he's claiming that the Yardbirds invented feedback and saying that Pete Townsend is claiming it. But as far as I know, some of the old blues guys used feedback, didn't they, back in the day? I think Ray used it as well. I'm sure he did.
Right, okay.
And the Beatles had it on I Feel Fine. But he talks about shapes of things here and what an important sort of piece of work it was. And talk about feedback. This is that great solo by Jeff Beck all over it, which is monumental, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I never really understood what everybody went on about with Jeff Beck because I'm not a big fan or anything. And I watched some of his gear on YouTube recently and, yeah, fair enough. Hold my hands up. Something else funny.
Yeah, wonderful. Anyway, we need to move on. Well, we're not going to go to the Yardbirds, are we?
We're going to go to Norma Taniga and walking my cat named Dog, intriguingly.
This is good.
Thanks very much, mate, and we'll do the same again on Thursday.
We shall. Look forward to it.
Cheers, Bobber. Bye, mate. Okay, thanks everybody for listening tonight. And yeah, as we said, Giddy's next. See you tomorrow. House of All, live in session.
BBC 6 Music.
And shut the door on your way out.